a German Shepherd puppy falling from a 100-foot bridge. Everyone believed they were witnessing a tragedy, but what happened next stunned onlookers and defied all explanation. Get ready for a heart-stopping story of survival, extraordinary courage, and a series of events that will make you question what's truly possible. This is the remarkable journey of Atlas, a 3-month-old German Shepherd puppy whose impossible fall became the beginning of something miraculous. The Riverside Bridge stood as an architectural marvel, spanning the churning waters of the Colorado River. At 100 feet above the water, it offered breathtaking views that attracted tourists and locals alike, especially on perfect May afternoons like this one. Rebecca Morgan, a 34-year-old veterinarian, had decided to take her 3-month-old German Shepherd puppy, Atlas, for their evening walk across the bridge. The energetic pup had nearly completed his vaccinations and was finally exploring the wider world beyond their backyard. "Easy, Atlas," Rebecca cautioned as the puppy strained at his new leash, eager to investigate every scent and sound. His oversized paws and ears hinted at the magnificent dog he would become, though his current gangly frame was all puppy enthusiasm. The bridge bustled with the usual evening crowd. Rebecca stopped midway across to admire the view, Atlas sitting obediently at her feet, his tail sweeping the concrete in wide, happy arcs. A cyclist came around the bend too fast, swerving to avoid a pedestrian. The sudden movement startled Atlas, who jumped backward in fear. Rebecca felt the leash pulled from her grip as Atlas backed away in panic, his collar slipping over his head. "Atlas, stay!" she called desperately, but fear had overwhelmed his training. The puppy backed directly into the pedestrian railing. In any other circumstance, the barrier would have stopped him. But through some cruel twist of fate, a section of the lower railing had been damaged by a recent storm. The gap was just wide enough for a small puppy. Time seemed to slow as Rebecca watched Atlas's hind legs slip through the opening. His front paws scrabbled frantically at the concrete, brown eyes wide with confusion and terror. She lunged forward, fingers grazing his fur, but unable to grasp him. "No!" she screamed as Atlas vanished through the gap. Far below, the Colorado River churned with spring runoff, its surface broken by partially submerged rocks and swirling currents. The height was more than enough to be fatal for a human, let alone a 15-pound puppy. Michael Chen, a 28-year-old kayaker who had been preparing to paddle downstream, witnessed the fall. Without hesitation, he launched his kayak into the current, paddling frantically toward the spot where the puppy had disappeared beneath the surface. Above, Rebecca ran toward the shore access point, her heart pounding with dread. The chances of survival were virtually none. The fall alone could be fatal. Add the dangerous currents and cold water, and hope seemed impossible. Yet as the crowd watched in stunned silence, something broke the river's surface 30 yards downstream from the impact point. A small, wet head, desperately paddling. Atlas was alive. But the miracle had only just begun. Michael maneuvered his kayak through the churning rapids, eyes locked on the struggling puppy. Atlas was fighting the current with everything his small body had, but was being swept downstream at an alarming rate. "Hang on, buddy," Michael called, though he knew the terrified animal couldn't understand. The kayaker had rescued stranded wildlife before, but never in such treacherous conditions. On the shore, Rebecca ran alongside the river, scrambling over rocks and underbrush, her medical training at war with her emotional panic. "Please," she whispered repeatedly, a prayer to whoever might be listening. Atlas disappeared underwater again, then resurfaced several yards farther downstream, clearly weakening. His small head barely broke the surface now, and his paddling had become erratic. Michael pushed his paddle deeper, gaining speed. He was close now, perhaps 15 feet from the struggling puppy. But what he didn't see was the partially submerged tree trunk ahead, its gnarled branches creating a deadly strainer in the current. Atlas was heading directly for it. Just as Atlas approached the deadly branches, something remarkable happened. A large branch floating nearby seemed to shift course unnaturally, sliding between Atlas and the strainer. The puppy collided with this makeshift barrier instead, momentarily protected from the deadlier obstacle. Michael didn't question the lucky break. He closed the distance and reached out with his paddle. "Grab on, boy." Whether by instinct or desperation, Atlas managed to get his front paws on the paddle blade. With tremendous care, Michael guided his kayak sideways and lifted the waterlogged puppy aboard. But the river wasn't finished with them yet. A sudden hydraulic wave appeared directly in their path. The kayak tipped precariously as they hit the churning water. Michael braced himself, using his body to shield the puppy. In that critical moment, Atlas seemed to understand his protector's intentions. Instead of panicking, the puppy went still, pressing himself against Michael's chest. Their unexpected teamwork allowed Michael to execute a role that kept them upright. They pushed through the hydraulic and into calmer water. As they approached the shore, Rebecca waded knee-deep into the water. Michael handed the wet bundle of fur to her waiting arms. Atlas immediately recognized his owner, his tail giving one weak wag before he collapsed against her chest, utterly exhausted. "He's alive," Rebecca whispered, tears streaming down her face as she quickly assessed her puppy. Emergency services arrived minutes later, including Dr. James Wilson, a fellow veterinarian who had been driving nearby when the call came in. He helped Rebecca perform a thorough examination of Atlas right there on the riverbank. "This doesn't make sense," Dr. Wilson muttered, checking the puppy's limbs, spine, and abdomen. A fall from that height should have caused severe internal injuries, broken bones at minimum. Yet Atlas had no broken bones, no signs of internal bleeding, not even a sprain. Beyond exhaustion, mild hypothermia, and a few superficial scratches, the puppy seemed miraculously unharmed. "It's impossible," Rebecca agreed, wrapping Atlas in emergency blankets as the shivering subsided. "But here he is." What no one realized then was that Atlas's survival wasn't just lucky. It was the beginning of something extraordinary that would challenge everything they thought they knew about the connection between animals and the world around them. Atlas spent the night under observation at Rebecca's veterinary clinic. Despite all medical expectations, the puppy's recovery was remarkable. By morning, he was alert, eating normally, and showing no signs of trauma beyond a slight limp in his right hind leg. "I've never seen anything like it," Rebecca told Michael, who had stopped by to check on the puppy. "The fall alone should have been fatal. Even if he somehow survived that, the hypothermia and exhaustion should have caused more lasting effects." Atlas wagged his tail at the sound of Michael's voice, ears perked forward in recognition. When the kayaker knelt to greet him, the puppy licked his hand enthusiastically. "Looks like someone remembers his rescuer," Rebecca smiled. "You're his hero." Michael shook his head. "I'm just glad I was there. But that was some coincidence with the branch blocking him from that strainer. I've never seen the river current move debris like that before." What happened next caught them both by surprise. Atlas suddenly stood at attention, staring intently at the clinic window. Outside, dark clouds were gathering, though no rain had been forecast. "That's odd," Rebecca said. "The weather report was clear skies all day." Within minutes, an unexpected thunderstorm broke over the town. Atlas had somehow sensed it coming before the first clouds were visible. Over the next week, Rebecca noticed other unusual behaviors. Atlas consistently anticipated the doorbell seconds before it rang. He would stand by his water bowl moments before Rebecca realized it needed refilling. Most strikingly, he began bringing Rebecca her phone just before it received calls, as if he could sense the incoming connection. "It's probably just coincidence," she told herself, though less convincingly each time. 2 weeks after the fall, Rebecca took Atlas for his first return visit to the riverside, staying far from the bridge. As they approached the water, Atlas stopped, his whole body rigid with attention. His ears swiveled forward, nose working the air. Then he bolted, pulling the leash from Rebecca's hand. She chased after him, calling his name, but the puppy was running with purpose toward a dense patch of shoreline reeds. When Rebecca caught up, she found Atlas pawing frantically at the muddy bank, whining with distress. Thinking he might have found an injured animal, She knelt beside him. The sound was so faint she almost missed it, a weak mewing coming from beneath a tangle of debris. Rebecca carefully pulled back the reeds to reveal a plastic bag half submerged in the water. Inside were 3 tiny kittens, barely a week old, soaked and nearly motionless. "Oh my God," she gasped, immediately wrapping the fragile creatures in her jacket. "How did you know?" Atlas watched intently as Rebecca examined each kitten. Their condition was critical, hypothermic and weak from dehydration. They must have been dumped recently and would certainly have drowned once the tide rose. Dr. Wilson arrived to help, puzzled by the sudden emergency. "How did you even find them? They weren't visible from the path." "I didn't find them," Rebecca replied, nodding toward Atlas. "He did. Somehow he knew exactly where they were." Later that evening, with the kittens stabilized in an incubator, Rebecca sat with Atlas at her feet, trying to make sense of it all. The puppy that had miraculously survived the unsurvivable was now exhibiting behaviors that defied explanation. It was as if his fall had awakened something inside him, a heightened awareness, an impossible intuition. "What happened to you out there?" she whispered, stroking his ears. "What did you bring back from the river?" Atlas looked up at her with eyes that suddenly seemed older than his months, more knowing than any dog should be. 1 month after his fall, Atlas had grown noticeably, though still unmistakably a puppy. His coat was thickening into the classic black and tan of a German shepherd, his lanky frame beginning to show hints of the powerful dog he would become. But his physical development was overshadowed by the increasingly remarkable abilities he displayed. Rebecca had begun keeping a detailed journal, documenting each incident that defied conventional explanation. The pattern was unmistakable. Atlas could sense things before they happened, detect distress from impossible distances, and locate people or animals in need with uncanny precision. Dr. Wilson, initially skeptical, became a believer after witnessing Atlas's abilities firsthand. During a routine examination of a cat named Shadow, the puppy suddenly became agitated, pawing at the examining table with unusual intensity. "What's gotten into him?" Wilson asked, watching Atlas's frantic behavior. Rebecca had learned to trust the puppy's instincts. "Check Shadow again. Something's wrong." Wilson repeated his examination, this time running additional tests. To his shock, he discovered the early stages of an abdominal obstruction that had shown no clinical symptoms, a potentially fatal condition caught before any traditional veterinary procedure would have detected it. "That's not possible," Wilson whispered, looking between the diagnostic results and the now calm puppy. There were no indicators. "Not for us," Rebecca said simply. But for him. News of Atlas's abilities spread through their small town of Riverside. What began as local curiosity soon attracted wider attention. A reporter from the regional newspaper wrote a feature article titled "The Miracle Puppy of Riverside Bridge," complete with photographs of Atlas and interviews with witnesses to his extraordinary abilities. Michael Chen, who had maintained a close friendship with Rebecca and Atlas since the rescue, suggested they visit the river again. "It's where it all began," he pointed out. "Maybe there's a connection." At the riverside, Atlas showed no fear of the water that had nearly claimed his life. Instead, he approached the edge with evident purpose, studying the currents with an intensity that seemed impossible for a dog his age. When a family with small children began setting up a picnic nearby, Atlas suddenly abandoned his contemplation of the water. The puppy raced toward the family, barking urgently. Rebecca followed, apologizing for the interruption, until she saw what Atlas had detected. A young boy was opening a food container filled with chocolate-covered nuts, about to share them with the family's Labrador retriever. "Stop!" Rebecca called out. "Chocolate is toxic to dogs." The family was stunned. The container had been closed and Atlas had been at least 30 feet away when they'd unpacked it. There was no way he could have seen or smelled its contents. How did he know? the mother asked, looking at Atlas with newfound respect. That evening, Dr. Wilson visited Rebecca's clinic with a proposal. "We need to document this properly," he said. "Bring in someone with expertise in canine cognition. Whatever happened to Atlas when he fell from that bridge? It could revolutionize how we understand animal perception." Wilson contacted Dr. Eleanor Reeves, a renowned researcher specializing in canine cognition from Colorado State University. Under her observation, Atlas demonstrated abilities that defied scientific explanation, detecting hidden objects through solid barriers, anticipating events before they occurred, and perceiving distress before any physical symptoms appeared. "This puppy isn't just special," Dr. Reeves concluded after a week of testing. "The fall didn't just spare him, it awakened something extraordinary." By the time Atlas reached 5 months of age, his reputation had spread beyond Riverside. The local newspaper's story had been picked up by national media, bringing a wave of attention to the small town and its miraculous puppy. Dr. Reeves's preliminary research paper had ignited debate in academic circles about the nature and limits of canine perception. Rebecca had become fiercely protective, filtering the increasing requests for demonstrations and research access. She was determined that Atlas's welfare would never be compromised by scientific curiosity or media sensationalism. Despite her concerns, Rebecca couldn't ignore the growing evidence of Atlas's potential to help others. The puppy had already been responsible for several life-saving interventions, from detecting an undiagnosed heart condition in a clinic visitor to alerting Rebecca to an electrical fault before it could cause a fire. On a warm Saturday afternoon, Rebecca took Atlas to Lake Carson, a popular recreation area outside town. The lake was crowded with weekend visitors, enjoying the first truly warm day of summer. Atlas was practicing basic obedience commands when he suddenly went rigid, staring toward the swimming area. Without warning, he bolted, ignoring Rebecca's recall command completely. She chased after him, apologizing as he weaved between sunbathers. Atlas raced to the shoreline and plunged into the water without hesitation, swimming with power and precision that belied his youth. Lifeguards were already responding to commotion 50 yards offshore, where a teenage girl had disappeared beneath the surface while swimming with friends. Her companions were calling for help, pointing frantically at the spot where she had vanished. Atlas reached the location before the lifeguards, dove underwater, and moments later surfaced with the girl's shirt in his teeth. He struggled to keep her face above water until rescue personnel arrived to take over. The girl was unconscious but alive, having suffered a seizure while swimming. He knew exactly where she was. One lifeguard marveled as paramedics worked to revive the teenager. She had gone under without a sound. Even her friends couldn't pinpoint the location. The incident made national news, with cell phone footage of Alice's rescue spreading across social media. Overnight, the miracle puppy became a sensation. Interview requests flooded Rebecca's phone, while research institutes offered substantial grants to study Atlas's abilities. Dr. Reeves helped Rebecca navigate the sudden attention, establishing boundaries to protect Atlas while allowing for continued documentation of his extraordinary capabilities. Together, they developed a protocol to share their findings with the scientific community while ensuring the young dog wasn't overwhelmed or exploited. His abilities appear to be strengthening, Dr. Reeves noted during their regular assessment session. The range of his awareness is expanding, and he's demonstrating increasing precision in his interventions. This was confirmed dramatically when Atlas abruptly abandoned his dinner one evening, racing to Rebecca's side with such urgency that she immediately followed him to her car. Without clear direction, she allowed him to guide her through a series of turns leading out of town. They arrived at a hiking trail where a search was being organized for a missing diabetic hiker. Atlas immediately took the lead, pulling them away from the main trail into dense underbrush, where conventional search patterns hadn't yet extended. Within 20 minutes, Atlas located the missing man. The hiker had wandered off trail after becoming disoriented from low blood sugar, then fallen into a shallow ravine. "Your dog saved my life," the man told Rebecca later at the hospital. "The doctor said I wouldn't have survived the night out there." 6 months after his fall, Atlas had matured into a striking adolescent German Shepherd. Though still not fully grown, he moved with the confidence and purpose of a much older dog. His puppy playfulness remained, but was increasingly balanced by an uncanny focus that emerged whenever his special abilities were needed. Dr. Reeves had expanded her research team, bringing in specialists in neurology, animal behavior, and even quantum physics. Their findings consistently defied conventional scientific explanations. Atlas could detect electromagnetic field changes imperceptible to instruments, sense biochemical shifts in living organisms before symptoms appeared, and, most remarkably, anticipate events minutes to hours before they occurred. His brain is processing information at a level we've never documented in any species, Dr. Reeves explained, reviewing the latest scan results. It's as if the trauma of the fall reconfigured his neural pathways, opening channels of perception most beings never access. On a crisp autumn morning, Rebecca woke to find Atlas sitting attentively by her bedside, his expression unusually intent. This behavior had become a reliable indicator that something required their attention. "What is it, boy?" she asked, immediately alert. Atlas led her outside, where the day was just beginning. Nothing seemed amiss in the quiet neighborhood, yet the German shepherd's body language conveyed absolute certainty. He oriented himself toward the mountains west of town, his focus unwavering. Rebecca had learned to trust these signals implicitly. She gathered emergency supplies, loaded Atlas into her SUV, and began driving toward the mountain range. No calls had come in, no alerts had been issued, but experience had taught her that Atlas's awareness often preceded official recognition of emergencies. They drove for nearly an hour, following forest roads deeper into the wilderness. Finally, they arrived at a remote trailhead where a single vehicle sat abandoned in the parking area. "Someone's in trouble up there," Rebecca murmured, reading Atlas's body language. She called emergency services to report their location and suspicions, then prepared for a search. Atlas took the lead immediately, moving up the trail with purpose rather than following the scent patterns typical of search dogs. This was another aspect of his unique abilities. He didn't track in the conventional sense, but seemed to perceive distress directly, regardless of physical traces. 2 miles into the forest, they found her, a wildlife photographer who had fallen from an overlooking ridge while trying to photograph eagles. Her injuries weren't life-threatening, but a broken ankle had left her stranded overnight, her cell phone smashed in the fall. "How did you find me?" she asked as Rebecca administered first aid. "I wasn't even supposed to be here. No one knew where I was going." Rebecca nodded toward Atlas, who had positioned himself as a sentry, scanning their surroundings with alert attention. "He knew you needed help." What made this rescue particularly remarkable was what they learned afterward. The photographer, Lisa Chen, had been falling in and out of consciousness due to pain and exposure. During her lucid moments, she had focused intensely on visualizing help arriving, specifically imagining a German shepherd finding her. "I don't know why I pictured a German shepherd," she told Rebecca as they waited for the rescue helicopter. "I've never even owned a dog. The image just came to me strongly, and I held on to it." This incident triggered a new phase in Dr. Reeves's research. "It suggests a two-way connection," she theorized. Not just Atlas sensing distress, but potentially responding to directed thought. A form of consciousness bridging we've never documented before. 1 year had passed since Atlas's impossible fall from Riverside Bridge. He had grown into a magnificent young German shepherd, his puppy clumsiness replaced by the dignified bearing of his breed. At 15 months old, he was still maturing physically, but there was nothing immature about the intelligence in his amber eyes. The anniversary found Rebecca and Atlas walking along the riverbank, Dr. Reeves accompanying them with her research notebook. The scientist had documented hundreds of instances of Atlas's extraordinary abilities, building a case study unlike any in scientific literature. "We've confirmed 17 distinct perceptual expansions," Dr. Reeves explained as they walked. From electromagnetic sensitivity to what can only be described as consciousness bridging, he's essentially experiencing reality through dimensions most beings never access. Rebecca nodded, though her attention remained on Atlas. The German Shepherd moved with unusual purpose today, his focus drawn repeatedly to the bridge above them, the site of his fateful fall. He wants to go up there, Rebecca realized. He's been guiding us toward the access path all morning. Dr. Reeves looked concerned. Are you sure that's wise? It could trigger trauma responses. But Rebecca trusted Atlas's instincts completely. If he wants to return to the bridge, there's a reason. They made their way up the winding path to the bridge's pedestrian walkway. Atlas showed no fear or hesitation as they approached the spot where he had fallen through the damaged railing. The section had been repaired, reinforced with additional safety measures. At the center of the bridge, Atlas stopped, sitting precisely where he had fallen 1 year earlier. His posture was alert but calm, his attention focused on the rushing water far below. What is it, boy? Rebecca asked, kneeling beside him. What are you sensing? For several minutes, Atlas remained perfectly still, as if listening to something only he could hear. Then he did something unprecedented. He placed his paw directly over Rebecca's heart, fixing her with an intense gaze. In that moment, Rebecca experienced something extraordinary. The world around her seemed to shift, overlaid with patterns of energy and connection she had no words to describe. She could feel the water molecules moving beneath the bridge, sense the electrical impulses of tiny creatures in the soil, even perceive the slow pulse of growth in the trees along the shoreline. The experience lasted only seconds before fading, leaving her gasping. What was that? She whispered. Dr. Reeves looked alarmed. What happened? Are you all right? I felt what he feels. Rebecca struggled to articulate the experience. It was like seeing through his perception. Everything connected, everything visible across time. Atlas watched her calmly, as if this sharing had been his intention all along. When he stood and moved to Dr. Reeves, the scientist instinctively reached out. The same connection formed as Atlas placed his paw against her hand. Extraordinary, she breathed moments later, scientific detachment temporarily abandoned. It's not just that he perceives differently, he can share that perception, create a bridge between consciousnesses. In the months that followed, this ability became Atlas's most remarkable contribution. Working with carefully selected researchers and emergency responders, he demonstrated how his shared perception could revolutionize search and rescue operations, medical diagnosis, and disaster prevention. On his second birthday, Atlas received recognition from the governor, a specialized service medal acknowledging the lives he had directly saved through his extraordinary abilities. That evening, as Atlas sat beside her watching the sunset over the river that had nearly claimed him, Rebecca reflected on the miracle that had begun with tragedy. The puppy who had fallen from Riverside Bridge hadn't just survived against impossible odds. He had returned with a gift, a glimpse into perceptions beyond human understanding, and the ability to share that perception with others. You were always meant to fall, she whispered, her hand resting on his strong shoulder. So you could show us how to see. A German shepherd cowering in the corner of a shelter kennel after being struck by an impatient caretaker. What happened next not only changed the dog's life forever, but exposed a disturbing pattern that would ultimately transform an entire community's approach to animal welfare. This powerful story of resilience in the face of mistreatment reveals how a single moment of cruelty was captured by security cameras and sparked a chain reaction that nobody saw coming. Get ready for a journey that shows how sometimes the most profound changes begin with the courage of those who cannot speak but refuse to be silenced. The Oak Ridge County Animal Shelter was chronically understaffed and overwhelmed. Budget cuts had reduced the workforce to a skeleton crew responsible for too many animals in facilities that were long overdue for renovation. The stress showed on everyone's faces, human and animal alike. In the last kennel of the dog wing, a German shepherd named Maverick had been cowering since his arrival 3 days earlier. Found wandering near the interstate, no microchip or collar, he exhibited the classic signs of abuse, flinching at quick movements, ducking when humans raised their hands, trembling when voices grew loud. Jenny Winters, the shelter's volunteer coordinator, had made special note of Maverick's case. "He needs gentle handling," she'd written on his intake form. "No sudden movements. Speak softly. Give him space." But this Tuesday morning, Jenny was out sick, and the shelter was short-staffed as usual. Marcus Davis, a recently hired caretaker with minimal training and growing frustration at the demanding workload, was tasked with cleaning Maverick's kennel. "Come on, move," Marcus snapped, trying to shift the German shepherd to one side of the enclosure. Maverick froze, eyes wide, body tense. When Marcus reached for his collar, the dog cowered further into the corner. What happened next was captured by the shelter's security camera. Marcus, his patience exhausted by a morning of difficulties, raised his hand and struck Maverick on the muzzle. "I said move!" The German shepherd yelped and pressed himself harder against the wall, trembling violently, eyes showing pure terror. Marcus finished cleaning quickly and moved on, unaware that his actions had been recorded. But as he left, he failed to properly secure Maverick's kennel door, a mistake that would set in motion events no one could have anticipated. 30 minutes later, Elena Rodriguez arrived for her volunteer shift. The 20-year-old veterinary student had specifically requested to work with Maverick after reading his intake notes. She'd brought high-value treats and planned to simply sit near his kennel, helping him associate humans with positive experiences. As Elena approached the dog wing, she was met with an unusual sight. Maverick was not in his kennel. Heart racing, she quickly scanned the other enclosures, then rushed to check if someone had moved him. Finding no sign of the German shepherd, she alerted the front desk, triggering a facility-wide search. Security footage would later show what had happened. After Marcus left, Maverick had remained frozen for nearly 15 minutes. Then slowly, the traumatized dog had nudged the unsecured door with his nose. When it swung open, he'd slipped out, navigating the hallways with his head low, avoiding human contact until finding an unlocked supply closet where he'd hidden himself behind a stack of blankets. That's where Elena eventually found him, curled into the smallest possible ball, shaking uncontrollably. What she did next would not only change Maverick's life, but would ultimately expose a pattern of neglect that had gone unchecked for far too long. Elena moved slowly, keeping her body low and non-threatening. "Hey there, buddy," she whispered, remaining at a distance that respected Maverick's space. "You're okay now." She didn't attempt to grab him or force him from his hiding place. Instead, she sat on the floor, back against the wall, and waited. After 15 minutes of silence, she began softly reading aloud from her phone, a technique she'd learned for traumatized animals, allowing them to grow accustomed to a human's presence without direct interaction. An hour passed before Maverick showed any response. His trembling gradually subsided, and occasionally he would glance at Elena before quickly looking away. Progress was measured in these tiny moments. When shelter manager Tony Grayson found them, he was initially irritated that Elena hadn't immediately reported finding the dog. His expression changed, however, when he saw Maverick voluntarily shift slightly closer to Elena while she read. "How did he get out?" Tony asked quietly. "I don't know," Elena replied, "but something spooked him badly. He's more shut down than when I saw him yesterday." Tony sighed. "Let's check the security footage. Can you stay with him until we figure out a safe way to get him back to his kennel?" What the security cameras revealed left Tony speechless. The footage clearly showed Marcus striking Maverick, followed by the caretaker's carelessness with the kennel door. More disturbing was the discovery that this wasn't an isolated incident. Reviewing earlier footage revealed Marcus had been rough with several animals over the past month. Tony immediately suspended Marcus pending investigation and called Jenny, despite her being out sick. "We have a situation," he explained, and I need your expertise with Maverick. He trusts Elena somewhat, but we need to move him from the supply closet. By evening, they had successfully coaxed Maverick into a quiet office, converted into temporary housing. Elena had volunteered to stay late, continuing to read aloud while maintaining a respectful distance as the German Shepherd gradually adjusted to the new space. What happens now? Elena asked Jenny, who had arrived despite being unwell. We document everything, Jenny replied grimly, and we need to check all the animals Marcus has handled for signs of mistreatment. She hesitated before adding, but there's something else you should know about Maverick. Jenny pulled up his intake photos on her tablet. Notice anything? Elena studied the images, then looked at Maverick across the room. The markings around his eyes and muzzle are different. Jenny nodded. Because this isn't Maverick. Based on these distinctive markings and a small scar on his right flank, I believe this is actually Duke, a police K9 who went missing during a training exercise 2 months ago. Elena's eyes widened. A police dog? But why didn't they find him when they scanned for a microchip? That's what worries me, Jenny said, lowering her voice. According to his intake notes, the scanner didn't detect anything. Either his microchip migrated or someone deliberately missed it, Elena finished, the implication hanging heavily between them. Neither woman could have predicted how this discovery would connect to a larger web of corruption that had been festering within the county's animal control system, or how a traumatized German Shepherd would become the key to unraveling it all. Officer Jason Reeves had spent 8 weeks searching for his missing partner. Duke had disappeared during a rural training exercise, vanishing into dense woods without a trace. The official report suggested the German Shepherd had likely been killed by coyotes or had suffered an accident in the rough terrain, but Jason refused to accept this conclusion. He's too well trained to just wander off, Jason had insisted to his superiors, and we would have found remains if he'd been attacked. When Jason received Jenny's call, he broke every speed limit driving to the shelter. Surveillance footage showed the moment he entered the office where Duke was being kept. The German Shepherd's reaction was immediate and stunning. Despite his traumatized state, Duke's ears perked forward, his body tensed, and then, in a moment that brought tears to those watching, he raced across the room and pressed himself against Jason's legs, whining with recognition. "Where have you been, partner?" Jason whispered, kneeling to embrace his dog. Duke trembled against him, simultaneously displaying joy at the reunion and lingering fear from his recent experiences. The physical examination that followed raised disturbing questions. Duke's microchip had been surgically removed. A small, partially healed incision was discovered when they shaved the fur from his shoulder. He had lost nearly 15 pounds, and in addition to the new psychological trauma, he showed evidence of having been kept in confined quarters for extended periods. This wasn't a case of a lost dog being picked up by animal control, Jenny explained as they reviewed the findings. Someone took him deliberately, removed his chip, and kept him somewhere before he either escaped or was abandoned near the highway where he was found. The implications were serious enough to warrant opening an official investigation. Duke's status as a police K9 meant his theft and mistreatment constituted a federal offense. Within hours, the local police department and the FBI had begun gathering evidence, including the security footage of Marcus striking Duke. When questioned, Marcus claimed no knowledge of Duke's origins beyond finding him as a stray. However, his phone records told a different story, revealing communications with individuals suspected of involvement in dog fighting rings across the state. While Duke showed no evidence of having been forced to fight, investigators theorized he might have been intended for breeding or training other dogs due to his exceptional temperament and abilities. Throughout the initial investigation, Elena remained at the shelter, helping with the documentation and care of other animals potentially mistreated by Marcus. One evening, as she prepared to leave, she found Tony reviewing additional security footage with a federal agent. "There's something odd here," Tony was saying, replaying a sequence from 2 nights before Duke was officially found as a stray. The grainy footage showed a shelter vehicle returning after hours, with Marcus and another figure unloading what appeared to be a sedated German shepherd. He didn't find Duke as a stray, Elena realized. He brought him in himself and created a false intake story. The FBI agent nodded grimly. And we need to figure out why. If they went to the trouble of removing his microchip and then bringing him to a shelter, rather than simply abandoning him somewhere, they had a specific purpose. As the investigation expanded, so did the evidence of a larger conspiracy. Duke had not been the only missing dog with specialized training to disappear in recent months, nor was the Oak Ridge County shelter the only facility where documentation had been falsified. A pattern was emerging of valuable working dogs being stolen, their identities obscured, and then being processed through shelters with the help of insiders like Marcus. The question remaining was why? A question Duke himself would ultimately help answer, in a way no one expected. 2 weeks after his reunion with Jason, Duke began the process of rehabilitation. The psychological impact of his ordeal had left scars deeper than his physical injuries. He showed signs of anxiety in enclosed spaces and would panic if separated from Jason, suggesting he had experienced prolonged confinement and isolation. It's common with trauma cases, explained Dr. Mira Santos, the veterinary behaviorist working with Duke. But his strong foundation of training and the secure bond he has with Officer Reeves give him advantages many traumatized animals don't have. Jason had taken leave from active duty to focus on Duke's recovery, converting his garage into a comfortable space where the German Shepherd could decompress without feeling trapped. Elena visited regularly, having formed a connection with Duke during those crucial hours in the shelter. During one such visit, Elena noticed Duke's unusual reaction when she set down her backpack, which contained textbooks from her veterinary classes. The German Shepherd became alert, focusing intently on the bag, his nostrils flaring. "What is it, boy?" Jason asked, recognizing his partner's alert posture, the same one Duke would assume when detecting narcotics during his police work. Elena carefully opened her backpack. "I have my pharmacology textbook and notes. We're studying different drug classifications this semester." Jason's expression changed. The narcotics unit had been investigating a new synthetic drug being distributed locally. Duke and I assisted on several searches before he disappeared. This observation led to a carefully orchestrated test. Under controlled conditions, Duke was presented with various scents, including samples from the pharmacology lab. His response was definitive. He alerted strongly to compounds similar to those used in manufacturing the synthetic drug. They took him because of what he knows, Jason realized. Someone discovered Duke could detect their product and saw him as a threat to their operation. The FBI incorporated this information into their expanding investigation, now focused on connections between the dog theft ring and drug manufacturing operations. The breakthrough came when analyzing the soil samples taken from Duke's paws and fur at intake, which contained chemical traces consistent with drug production along with distinct mineral markers that helped narrow the search area. Meanwhile, conditions at the Oak Ridge shelter were undergoing rapid change. The investigation had revealed multiple violations, leading to the county commissioners approving emergency funding for staff, training, and facility improvements. Jenny, promoted to interim director after Tony resigned amid questions about his oversight failures, implemented new protocols for animal care and security. Elena found herself offered a paid position coordinating volunteer training, her experience with Duke having demonstrated her exceptional ability to work with traumatized animals. The shelter was transforming into a model facility, with community support pouring in as the story of Duke's mistreatment and the subsequent investigation made local headlines. 4 months after Duke had been found, the FBI executed coordinated raids on multiple properties identified through the investigation. They discovered not only drug manufacturing operations, but also several missing dogs, including 2 other former police K-9s who, like Duke, had been stolen because of their ability to detect certain chemicals. The raid also uncovered evidence implicating a network of corrupt officials who had been protecting the operation, including, most shockingly, a high-ranking member of the county government who oversaw animal control funding. Through it all, Duke continued his recovery, gradually returning to his confident self. Jason documented this journey, sharing updates that inspired the community and brought attention to issues of animal welfare and the special needs of traumatized pets. What had begun with an act of cruelty captured on camera had expanded into a movement that would ultimately save countless animal lives. And the German shepherd who had cowered in fear after being struck by an impatient caretaker? He would soon return to service, though in a capacity no one had initially imagined. "Are you sure about this?" Dr. Santos asked, watching Duke move confidently through the training course. "He's made remarkable progress, but returning to full police duty involves significant stress." Jason nodded, though his expression revealed mixed emotions. Duke's recovery has exceeded everyone's expectations, but you're right. I don't think traditional K9 work is the right fit for him anymore. 6 months had passed since Duke's rescue from the shelter. The criminal case against Marcus and his associates had expanded to include charges ranging from animal cruelty to drug trafficking and corruption. Throughout the legal proceedings, Duke had remained a symbol of resilience, his story inspiring changes in how law enforcement approached animal welfare cases. Now, as autumn painted the training facilities surrounding trees in gold and crimson, Jason and Duke were pioneering something new. With support from the police department and grant funding secured through Elena's advocacy, they were developing a specialized program for Duke to serve as a rehabilitation partner for traumatized animals being processed as evidence in abuse cases. "He understands them in a way humans can't," Jason explained, watching Duke gently approach a recently rescued terrier that had been cowering in its enclosure for days, refusing food or human contact. "He's been where they are." Elena, now completing her veterinary studies while working part-time at the reformed Oak Ridge shelter, had documented remarkable results. Animals paired with Duke showed faster stress reduction, improved social behaviors, and greater responsiveness to rehabilitation techniques. His presence seemed to communicate a message that humans couldn't convey. "You are safe now." "I understand. It gets better." Today's session was particularly significant. The terrier had been rescued from one of the properties raided as part of the investigation Duke had helped spark. Like many animals recovered from abuse situations, it exhibited extreme fear responses that made medical treatment and basic care challenging. Duke approached with the careful body language he had developed for these interactions, head slightly lowered, movements slow and deliberate, maintaining a respectful distance while communicating peaceful intentions. The terrier, which had growled and retreated from all human approaches, watched Duke with cautious interest. After several minutes of this delicate dance, Duke lay down a few feet from the terrier's enclosure, positioning himself so the smaller dog could observe him without feeling threatened. Jason and Elena remained further back, documenting the interaction but not interfering. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, the terrier's posture shifted from defensive to curious. By session's end, it had moved slightly closer to the front of its enclosure, and for the first time since rescue, accepted food in the presence of observers. "That's the 4th success this week," Elena noted, updating her records. The prosecution team is calling Duke's evidence transformative in building their animal welfare cases. The before and after documentation is helping judges understand the psychological impact of abuse in ways written reports never could. The program was expanding beyond initial expectations. What had begun as rehabilitation for Duke had evolved into a pioneering approach to animal welfare in legal contexts. Other departments were sending representatives to learn the techniques, with plans to implement similar programs using recovered K9s who might not return to traditional police work. "There's something else," Jason said as they walked Duke back to the transport vehicle. The department's community outreach division wants Duke to become the face of a new education program about animal welfare and reporting suspected abuse. They believe his story helps people connect emotionally with the issue. Elena smiled. "From victim to advocate, it's perfect." What neither of them discussed, though both understood, was how Duke's journey had transformed their own lives as well. Jason had discovered a new purpose beyond traditional police work, becoming a sought-after expert in animal welfare as it intersected with law enforcement. Elena had found her veterinary career path focusing on forensic medicine and trauma recovery, with multiple job offers already extended for after her graduation. As they drove away from the training facility, Duke sat alertly in his specialized compartment, watching the world pass by through the window, a far cry from the terrified dog who had hidden behind blankets in a shelter supply closet. His journey from victim to healing presence for others embodied the program's core message. Trauma need not be the end of the story. The courtroom fell silent as Duke entered with Jason. Despite months of preparation, there had been concern about how the German Shepherd would respond to the formal environment and the presence of individuals associated with his trauma. But Duke walked confidently beside his handler, his rehabilitation complete in ways that once seemed impossible. This hearing represented the culmination of a sprawling investigation that had uncovered corruption extending from local animal control to state-level regulatory agencies. Marcus Davis, the caretaker whose abuse had been captured on security footage, was merely one node in a network that had exploited shelter systems to conceal criminal activities ranging from drug manufacturing to organized theft of specialized working dogs. Duke's presence today served multiple purposes. Beyond his symbolic importance to the case, he was demonstrating the pioneering court support dog protocol that Jason and Elena had developed with legal and behavioral experts. This approach was being considered for implementation in animal welfare cases nationwide, allowing recovered animals to be present during proceedings without causing undue stress to the animals or disruption to court functions. As Duke settled on his designated mat near the witness stand, the judge addressed the assembly. I want to acknowledge the unusual nature of today's proceedings. The presence of this particular service animal has been approved due to his unique connection to this case and the precedent it may establish for future animal welfare prosecutions. Elena, seated in the gallery, felt a swell of pride as Duke maintained his composed demeanor. She thought back to their first meeting in that shelter supply closet. The terrified dog hiding behind blankets, too traumatized to make eye contact. His transformation was more than a personal victory. It represented the potential for healing that existed in even the most damaged victims. The prosecution presented evidence systematically, including the security footage that had started the investigation. When the video of Marcus striking Duke played on the courtroom monitors, the German Shepherd's ears flicked toward the sound, but he remained calm, grounded by Jason's reassuring presence and the extensive desensitization training they had undertaken. Expert witnesses explained how the investigation had expanded from that single incident to uncover a operation that had used shelters as processing points for stolen animals, particularly those with specialized training that made them valuable or threatening to criminal enterprises. Veterinary forensic specialists detailed how Duke's medical examination had provided critical evidence, from the surgically removed microchip to the chemical traces that had led investigators to drug manufacturing locations. When Jason took the stand, Duke maintained his position nearby, a living testament to both the trauma inflicted and the healing possible through proper intervention. Jason detailed Duke's original training, disappearance, and the remarkable reunion at the shelter, his testimony punctuated by occasional glances at his partner. In your professional opinion, the prosecutor asked, what would have happened to Duke had the abuse not been captured on security footage? Jason considered the question carefully. Based on the pattern established by the investigation, Duke would likely have been processed through the shelter system under his false identity as Maverick, then transferred to another facility or adopted out through channels controlled by the network. His valuable training would have been exploited, or if deemed too risky due to his ability to detect their drug manufacturing, he might have been eliminated. The implications hung heavily in the courtroom. How many other animals had been processed through similar channels before the scheme was uncovered? How many working dogs had disappeared without the determination that had driven Duke's case forward? As the hearing concluded for the day, reporters gathered outside, eager to capture images of the German Shepherd whose abuse had triggered the investigation. Instead of exploiting this interest, Jason and Elena had worked with the prosecutor's office to develop an educational approach, using media attention to highlight broader issues of animal welfare and community reporting of suspected abuse. Duke's story resonates because people see his journey from victim to advocate, Elena explained to a journalist as they left the courthouse. But the larger message is about the systems that failed before he was rescued, and how community vigilance is essential to preventing similar cases. What no one could have anticipated was how Duke's case would catalyze legislative change, as lawmakers began drafting enhanced protections for working animals and stronger oversight of shelter operations. From a single act of cruelty captured on camera had grown a movement with implications beyond any individual animal's story. 2 years to the day after Duke's rescue from the Oak Ridge County shelter, a ribbon-cutting ceremony marked the opening of the Duke's Dignity Center for Animal Rehabilitation and Training. The facility, built on repurposed county land with a combination of government funding and private donations, represented the tangible outcome of the case that had transformed animal welfare practices across the state. Duke, now 9 years old and fully recovered from his ordeal, sat attentively beside Jason as officials made their remarks. His graying muzzle and the small patches of white fur around his eyes gave him a distinguished appearance, complementing the specialized therapy dog vest he wore in his role as the center's canine ambassador. Elena, who had completed her veterinary degree and now served as the center's medical director, watched from nearby, remembering the frightened dog she had found hiding in a supply closet. The contrast between that traumatized animal and the confident, balanced German Shepherd before her never ceased to amaze her. The Duke's Dignity Center had multiple functions. It served as a rehabilitation facility for animals recovered from abuse situations, a training center for law enforcement and animal control officers, and an educational resource for the community. Most innovatively, it housed the Working Dog Recovery Program that Duke had inspired, a specialized approach to rehabilitating service and working dogs who had experienced trauma or required retraining for new roles. After the ceremony, visitors toured the facility, learning about the programs that had grown from Duke's case. In the rehabilitation wing, rescued animals received specialized care designed to address both physical and psychological trauma. The training center provided certification courses for animal welfare professionals, emphasizing evidence-based approaches to investigating abuse and supporting recovery. At the heart of it all was the bond between handler and animal exemplified by Jason and Duke. Their partnership had evolved from traditional police work to pioneering new territory in animal-assisted rehabilitation. Together, they had worked with dozens of traumatized animals, helping them reconnect with humans and, when possible, return to service in modified roles suited to their experiences. As the day's formal activities concluded, Jason and Elena found a quiet moment away from the crowds, watching Duke demonstrate calming signals to a recently rescued border collie in one of the rehabilitation yards. "Remember when we thought success would be just getting him back on police duty?" Jason said, smiling as Duke gently encouraged the more timid dog to explore a training obstacle. Elena nodded. He found a different purpose, maybe the one he was always meant for. The investigation sparked by Duke's case had led to significant convictions, with Marcus Davis and several higher-level operators receiving substantial sentences. More importantly, it had exposed systemic vulnerabilities that had allowed the exploitation of shelters and working animals. The resulting reforms included enhanced security protocols, better training for shelter staff, and specialized tracking systems for working dogs. Duke would never know the full impact of his story, how a moment of cruelty captured on camera had unleashed a chain of events that transformed an entire system. But as he guided another traumatized animal toward recovery, his actions spoke to a truth that had emerged from his journey. Sometimes the deepest wounds create the greatest capacity for healing others. The German Shepherd, who had once cowered after a harsh blow, now stood as a living embodiment of resilience, his very presence communicating to damaged animals and the humans who cared for them that trauma need not define a life, that fear could be overcome, and that purpose could be found even after profound betrayal. As the day ended and visitors departed, Duke returned to the home he shared with Jason, where he would rest before returning to his work tomorrow. The security cameras that had once captured his moment of victimization now served a different purpose, documenting success stories and training techniques that would help countless other animals. From a single act of cruelty had grown a legacy of compassion that would continue long after Duke's working days were done. A reminder that sometimes the most powerful advocates for change are those who have themselves experienced the very conditions they help transform. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that even the darkest moments can lead to unexpected light when we refuse to look away from suffering and instead channel our outrage into positive action. Every animal deserves dignity, and every act of compassion matters.